The gray floodplain stretched beneath them like a wounded ocean, its metallic mud rippling in subtle, treacherous waves. Karis adjusted the holographic interface before her, though the data flickered and fractured under the charged dust. The Taurian calculations, so precise on paper, were meaningless here. Sensors screamed contradictions, comms loops filled with static, targeting arrays oscillating between clarity and nonsense. "Third spearhead is lost," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Her fingers hovered over the interface. She had run the diagnostic 8 times, and the outcome was identical: clean, sequential data that signaled only one truth. The enemy here did not obey probability, physics, or reason. General Soren's dense, scarred silhouette filled the doorway behind her. The light from the flickering displays carved deep shadows in his face, revealing the lines of decades of campaigns. "Report," he said, though neither of them needed words. The carnage on the screens told the story with brutal eloquence. Karis exhaled slowly. "The survivors are retreating in disarray. 8% losses in 42 minutes. The floodplain is holding. It is consuming us." Torin's low rasp shook the thin air. "Tell High Command. Tell them to send us something that works. We are fighting a trench that eats perfection for breakfast." He slammed a fist into the console railing, leaving a dent in the silicate alloy. Without waiting for a reply, he strode away, leaving Karis bathed in the red glow of the dying monitors. The human contingent arrived 3 weeks later, stepping down from a dented transport freighter patched with mismatched alloys and scarred by the journey through Karis Prime's charged atmosphere. Only 12 of them, drab canvas uniforms, knees and elbows scuffed, rifles that smelled of oil and iron. No smart shells, no network targeting, no nanite-assisted gear. They carried leather cases, knives, and for some inexplicable reason, a slide rule. Karis met them at the hangar. "I am escorting you to your quarters," she said, her tone formal. Her mind raced through possibilities. They might demand access to digital maps, network targeting, or coordinate strikes through Taurian systems. Instead, they followed her silently, taking in the towering consoles and flickering monitors with an almost academic curiosity. The humans' leader, Sergeant Anton Graves, moved with quiet economy, a studied calm that betrayed centuries of instinctive training. His pale eyes assessed everything, noting weight, balance, and rhythm rather than the quantitative feeds Karis relied upon. "It's heavier than your reports say," he commented as they passed through the corridor. "Gravity, atmospheric pressure, dust, it all presses before the first shot is fired." Karis blinked. That simple observation, physical and unquantifiable, cut deeper than any sensor reading. He was perceiving the battlefield not through screens, but through his own body, his own instincts. The next morning, Karis began her formal assessment. "We will visit an observation post," she told Graves. "It is necessary for understanding the enemy's disposition and the difficulties our systems encounter." They arrived at OP Vector 9, a concrete blister dug into the hillside overlooking the floodplain. Inside, Taurian observers squinted at failing sensor feeds. Screens attempted to overlay strategic grids onto live feeds, but the images dissolved into snow every few seconds. The thick air smelled of burnt insulation and ionized dust, humming with the tension of failing life support. Karis gestured at the screens. "Our targeting systems cannot maintain a lock. The enemy has mastered the environment to defeat prediction algorithms." Graves raised his binoculars, scanning the gray expanse. "I see patterns," he said softly. "Just not the ones you're looking for." Karis frowned. "Patterns? Our systems." He ignored her. The next shell screamed from the ridge, slamming into the mud a kilometer away, throwing a column of silver-gray slurry into the air. Graves clicked his stopwatch, then scribbled a mark in a waterproof notebook. Another shell followed, closer this time. He clicked again. "Sergeant, why? Our sonic sensors already collect this data?" Karis asked. "They're looking for patterns," Graves replied, not taking his eyes from the ridge. "They think too hard. You can't predict chaos with algorithms." For 3 hours he remained at the slit, methodically tracking intervals between shots, noting minute differences in echo, rhythm, and impact. To Karis it was madness, data collected manually by eye and ear in the face of failure after failure. Yet as hours passed, the chaos of the floodplain began to reveal its own logic, not to machines but to the human mind. Later that evening, Karis walked into the human barracks expecting idleness or routine weapon maintenance. Instead, she found them gathered around a sand table, ration crates stacked into ridges, meal powder mixed into mud to simulate the floodplain. Tiny hand-carved metal tanks represented the destroyed units she had watched fall all week. Sonia, the one with the slide rule, drew precise lines across paper maps, intersecting bearings from the listening posts on the roof. Each X marked a potential artillery position. The human system, rudimentary by Taurian standards, functioned in defiance of all digital protocols. The old ways worked. They fire one round every 15 to 20 minutes, Sonia said, cycling between guns to confuse your systems. But the guns themselves remain stationary. Graves tapped the sand table. See? They hide in plain sight. They create noise for the machines, but we listen for rhythm. Karis wrote it all down, the first spark of understanding blooming in her mind. Chaos was not a weakness here, it was the planet's weapon. And humans were the only species capable of dancing to its rhythm. The morning haze over the flood plain clung to everything, a metallic mist that whispered of charged dust and unseen currents. Karis accompanied Graves and his team up to a shallow rise that overlooked a new sector of the gray mud flats. Sensors still screamed contradictions, targeting grids flickered in and out of alignment, and every automated drone remained a useless shard of metal tumbling in the air. Graves surveyed the landscape with a calm focus that bordered on reverence. "You see that ridge?" he asked, gesturing toward the distant Cast Night Hills. "We're not going to hit them with your systems. They want you to hit them. So we don't. We listen." Karis tilted her head, trying to parse the words. "Listen." He adjusted the binoculars, measuring distance, sight lines, the rise and fall of mud ridges. "Every gun has a rhythm. A crew has a rhythm. They may think chaos hides them from your calculations, but we can hear the pulse. We don't need a lock. We need the beat." The Taurian officers monitoring the humans muttered among themselves. Some snorted derisively, others watched with a growing unease. To rely on something as unquantifiable as rhythm, intuition, and simple observation, when trillions of digital simulations had failed, this was blasphemy. On the rooftop of the makeshift OP station, two human soldiers crouched behind the shielding, directional microphones in hand. Each microphone was a simple device, wired back to the sand table in the barracks. Graves had chosen listening posts spaced across 2 kilometers of the floodplain, their alignment calculated using the slide rule, compass, and geometry as old as warfare itself. From the rise, Karis watched as Sonia adjusted her protractor, aligning lines on the sand table with the bearing readings the soldiers relayed. "Heavy gun bearing 095, one of the soldiers called. "Time mark now." Sonia slid the central bar of her slide rule with a hiss, marking the intersection point. "Delta 59, she announced, the coordinates of a hidden Carcinite artillery position confirmed. Karis stared at the crude model in disbelief. "You're calculating artillery positions manually? With a slide rule? When our systems—" "They can't," Graves interrupted, his voice calm, steady. "The planet scrambles your sensors, disrupts your networks, corrupts your data. Chaos is a weapon here, Karis. Our weapon is adaptation." She had watched humans die on Karis Prime in ways Taurian tech could not prevent. Yet here, with their archaic methods, they were already outperforming machines. Already they were mastering the impossible. The next hours passed in a rhythm of its own. Every shell fired from the Carcinite ridge was recorded. Bearing, time interval, echo pattern. Karis noted the subtle difference between 2 impacts, a fraction of a second, a centimeter of displacement in the mud plume. Each detail mattered to the humans in ways no algorithm could interpret. By midday, Graves had mapped 3 additional artillery positions, each confirmed using nothing more than time, sound, and triangulation. Karis' mind, trained in probability matrices and network targeting protocols, struggled to reconcile the simplicity and effectiveness of what she was witnessing. "They hide in plain sight," Graves murmured. "They fire to confuse machines. But they can't hide from rhythm. We just listen." Later, at the sand table, Karis observed the human team plotting movement patterns. Each soldier's position, each possible route for an infiltration or strike, was overlaid onto the crude model of the floodplain. Unlike the Taurian systems, which projected idealized paths that failed when confronted with environmental chaos, the humans relied on adaptability. They could reroute, improvise, and take advantage of unpredictable events in real time. Sonia tapped a point on the map. "This position," she said, "is weak. The crew is fast on the reload, but the barrel is slightly misaligned. 1 round every 20 minutes, cycling guns. We just need to strike once at the right time." Graves looked up at Karis. "It's simple. We don't try to overwhelm them with precision. We move with the rhythm and the rest falls into place." Karis felt a dissonance in her chest. The humans were using methods that had been outlawed, discarded, or considered primitive for centuries. Yet here, on a planet that mocked technology, these methods were not just viable, they were superior. The first operation was quiet, almost invisible. A small team crept across the floodplain using low, irregular paths designed to avoid the unpredictable electronic surveillance that the Carcinites had adapted to. The humans moved slowly, calculating distance by steps and time, coordinating through subtle hand signals and the occasional whisper. No sensors, no networks, no drones, just bodies in motion attuned to the environment. When the team reached the artillery position, the strike was swift. A single well-aimed kinetic round disabled the gun, leaving the crew scattered and disoriented. The effect was immediate. Without one key position, the Carcinite barrage faltered, creating a small window for coalition forces to reposition safely. Kara's hands hovered over her interface, wanting to analyze the sequence, but the data defied her. It was not the numbers that mattered, it was timing, intuition, and adaptation. She finally understood Graves' point. The humans did not fight the battle in algorithms. They fought it in instinct, in perception, in the space between chaos and order. Back at the barracks, the human team debriefed around the sand table. Maps were marked, bearings recalculated, and the rhythm of the enemy slowly unfolded into a pattern that could only be read by a mind willing to think in pulses rather than probabilities. Karras documented every move with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. "They've done what our entire third spearhead couldn't do in weeks," she noted in her report. "Without advanced targeting. Without drones. Without guidance systems. They've mapped the enemy, disabled key assets, and survived in an environment that renders our technology useless." The human contingent demonstrates an ability to adapt to chaos not through intellect alone, but through a combination of perception, intuition, and experience. Their methods are unquantifiable, untested, yet effective. Graves leaned back in his chair, eyes on the floodplain visible through the windows. "We don't control the chaos," he said quietly. "We move through it. We learn its rhythm. And sometimes, that's enough." Karras finally allowed herself to nod. For the first time, she saw the battlefield not as a series of problems to be solved with technology, but as a living, breathing entity. And the humans, they were the only ones capable of dancing with it. The dawn on Karras Prime arrived in a slow, acrid haze, the gray floodplain stretching out like an ocean of metal slurry. Smoke and dust swirled along its surface, distorted by static electric currents that made drones tremble mid-flight and rendered even the most advanced sensors into useless noise. The Taurian command networks continued to flicker and stutter, but the humans, equipped with nothing more than canvas webbing, kinetic rifles, and instinct, were already moving. Sergeant Graves had called a meeting in the sand table room before first light. The map sprawled across the table, ridges and mudflats carefully modeled with ration crates and mixed meal powder. Tiny metal figurines marked the known positions of Carcinite artillery and forward units. To Karras, the method was laughably archaic, a relic of a pre-digital age. Yet as Graves spoke, every human in the room listened with a focus that made the old technology irrelevant. "We're going in small," Graves said, his pale eyes scanning the map. "We take the rhythm of their guns, their patrols, and move where they least expect it. Timing is everything. One wrong step and the floodplain swallows us, or worse." Sonia tapped a line across the map with a pencil. "Their positions are spaced in cycles. Fast reloads on some, slow on others. We can create disruption with minimal exposure, if we synchronize with their timing." Karras raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting?" "Exactly," Graves interrupted. "We don't rely on superior firepower. We rely on unpredictability, on improvisation, on reading the battlefield as a living entity. Chaos is their weapon, so we fight it with the same tool, human instinct." The humans moved out in pairs, their low-slung forms barely distinguishable from the gray mud and drifting dust. Each team carried nothing unnecessary, relying on senses honed through years of training in harsher, less forgiving environments than this charged alien world. Karras followed, notebook in hand, recording each observation, each movement, each decision. The first skirmish came near the base of the Cast Night Ridge. Carcinite patrols, expecting standard Taurian tactics, were immediately unsettled by the humans' unorthodox approach. Rather than advancing in straight lines or using predictable cover, the humans moved in arcs, shadows, and false trails, leaving no consistent signature for the Carcinite sensors or human-calculated projections to follow. A patrol approached, a small squad of 4, their eyes adjusting to the electric haze. Graves raised a hand. His team froze, then shifted subtly in sync with the patrol's rhythm. The soldiers' movements mimicked the natural sway of the terrain, each step calculated by instinct, not algorithm. When the patrol paused, uncertain of the human's presence, one of Graves' soldiers launched a kinetic round from concealment, precisely enough to disable one of the patrol without alerting the others. Karis scribbled in her log, "Humans exploit uncertainty rather than eliminate it. Minimal exposure, maximal disruption." They advanced, using the rhythm of the patrols and artillery cycles to mask their approach. Each strike was surgical, exploiting minor delays, misfires, or predictable quirks of the enemy's behavior. To the Taurian command, watching remotely through flickering feeds, it looked like random chaos. But Karis, observing in person, saw the pattern, the subtle mathematics of instinct, improvisation, and experience. By midday, the humans had disabled 2 additional artillery positions and disrupted enemy communications in a sector previously considered uncontrollable. The Taurian network algorithms attempted to recalculate, only to be defeated again by the inherent unpredictability of human timing. Each human move created a ripple through the battlefield, forcing the Carsonites into reactive measures and throwing their own tactics into disarray. Karis found herself involuntarily holding her breath as a team scaled a mud-slick incline to plant a kinetic charge. Unlike Taurian soldiers who relied on drones and remote guidance, the humans climbed blind, listening to the hum of energy currents and the faint thrum of distant artillery. One misstep could have buried them in the floodplain. Yet they moved with confidence born of intuition and practice, not calculated probability. From a ridge, Graves observed the results through a pair of binoculars. "See that?" he murmured to Karis. "Every shell they fire now is reactionary. They think they're in control, but they're dancing to our rhythm without realizing it." Karis realized then that she had been wrong to think the humans' methods were primitive. They were alien in their simplicity but terrifyingly effective. Where Taurian technology struggled against chaos, the humans thrived, exploiting it as a weapon rather than fearing it as a liability. The most striking moment came when a Carsonite commander attempted a counterattack using a small mechanized unit. The Taurian tactical overlays predicted a direct confrontation, automated weapon systems prepped for precision fire. But the humans, moving unpredictably across intersecting axes, lured the mechanized unit into a trap of their own making. One team triggered a controlled collapse of mud near a ridge, channeling the enemy vehicle into a pit, while another team disabled the machine's exposed systems with kinetic charges. Karis noted in her report, "Outcome impossible to predict with Taurian algorithms. Human improvisation converts environmental chaos into strategic advantage. Enemy overconfidence exploited successfully." By evening, the humans had established a pattern: observe, move with the rhythm of enemy activity, strike surgically, and retreat before retaliation could occur. Karis logged every detail, her skepticism replaced with awe. She could see why High Command had chosen humans, despite their archaic equipment. Technology failed on Karis Prime. Humans adapted. Graves returned his team to the sand table barracks. His pale eyes scanned the model of the floodplain, the positions of enemy units, and the lines they had traced over the day. "The battle isn't won," he said quietly. "Chaos is endless. But now we are part of it. Now we can move with it instead of against it." Karis understood, finally, that the humans did not conquer Karis Prime through brute force. They conquered it through attunement, perception, and courage. They were a species capable of operating where algorithms faltered, where hyperintelligence failed, where every assumption about warfare became meaningless. That night, as the Taurian officers debated on failing comms channels and the human soldiers huddled around the sand table, Karis realized a truth she hadn't yet documented fully. These humans were not just a tool. They were a force of nature. A wild, unpredictable, devastatingly effective force that no machine, no algorithm, no matter how advanced, could anticipate. And Karis knew, in the depths of her disciplined, analytical mind, that she had just begun to scratch the surface of what it meant to fight alongside them. The next morning, the human contingent convened in their makeshift war room, the sand table dominating the center like an altar to analog strategy. Sunlight filtered weakly through the dust-laden atmosphere, casting a gray haze over the mud flats outside. Karis entered silently, notebook in hand, ready to document yet another display of what Taurian doctrine would consider primitive, almost laughable methods. At the table, Sonia had already begun marking positions. Her slide rule slid smoothly, compass in hand. Gravel and small metal pieces represented enemy units. The gray floodplain was meticulously reconstructed with mixed ration powder, crates, and tiny scraps of mud. Every ridge, every hidden pit, every known or suspected artillery nest had been mapped. Graves surveyed the table with quiet authority. The Carsonites have adapted to our visibility, our sensors, and our drone coverage. They anticipate algorithms, but they cannot anticipate unpredictability. That's where we come in. Karis scribbled in her log, observation. Humans operate outside expected probabilistic models. They plan operations through physical representation and iterative human logic, rather than computational simulation. A soldier at the far side of the table pointed to a section of the floodplain. We can move 2 squads through here, he said, indicating a narrow mud corridor, and create a diversion at Point Echo to draw artillery fire away from the ridge. Graves nodded. Correct. But notice the timing. The Carsonites cycle their heavy guns every 15 to 20 minutes. If our squads move in that window, we remain unseen. They'll fire but miss. Our path remains unbroken. Karis blinked. You're relying entirely on timing, not detection? Exactly, Graves replied. Detection assumes the enemy's behavior is fixed. Timing assumes it is fluid, and we shape it. The humans divided tasks. One team prepared to advance across the mud flats, another coordinated listening posts to measure the rhythm of gunfire, and a third managed communications between units using simple line-of-sight signals and prearranged hand cues. Every move was calculated using physical observation, timekeeping, and human intuition. No digital networks. No predictive algorithms. Just humans reading humans, and a planet that punished machines. Karis followed Graves and Sonia outside to review the route physically. The floodplain stretched out, vast and gray, dotted with the skeletal remains of Taurian tanks and artillery. Each step across the metal mud composite required judgment and experience. Sensors would have failed. Machines would have slipped, spun, or misfired. Humans? They adjusted, instinctively, step by step, constantly recalibrating for terrain, dust, and subtle shifts in electromagnetic interference. Back in the barracks, the humans ran simulations at the sand table. Sonia traced paths with a pencil, calculating distances with her slide rule, factoring in the time between enemy gunfire, and marking safe corridors with small tokens. If Squad Alpha moves at this pace and Squad Beta follows 30 seconds later, we can isolate that artillery nest without detection, she explained. Karis leaned over the table, fascinated. This was more than strategy, it was a dance, a living choreography. Every line drawn, every token moved, represented a human mind anticipating chaos, responding fluidly and exploiting it as a weapon. Graves added, the Taurian network cannot anticipate us because it relies on rigidity. Every system expects linearity. We are nonlinear. The floodplain punishes predictability, rewards flexibility. Karis wrote furiously. Hypothesis. Humans thrive in environments hostile to logic-dependent systems because their decision-making is adaptive, intuitive, and probabilistic in a non-algorithmic sense. By mid-afternoon, the first coordinated maneuver began. Squad Alpha crept along a shallow channel of hardened mud, following a rhythm calculated by timing the artillery bursts. Squad Beta moved in parallel, unseen, their path calculated with triangulation and simple observation. A third team remained hidden near a ridge, ready to provide rapid intervention if needed. Karis watched through a small observation slit. The humans moved like shadows, unbound by the need for guidance systems, unaffected by failing communications, and completely attuned to their environment. Every misfire from the Carsonite artillery created a window, and the humans moved through it with precision that seemed almost impossible. The first objective was a forward observation post, lightly defended but crucial for controlling artillery fire. The humans bypassed the outer perimeter using the floodplain's natural cover, timing their advance between cycles of enemy fire. They reached the post undetected and in a matter of minutes, disabled key sensors and communications nodes, ensuring that the coalition's next moves would not be observed. Karis' fingers flew across her interface trying to model the operation. The data defied every predictive algorithm. It was a simple action by human standards, yet the effect was profound. A cascade of miscalculations in the enemy's firing pattern, a temporary collapse in observational capability. Later, the humans returned to the sand table to review. They plotted the effect of their operation, adjusting future paths. Delta 59 is clear for movement tomorrow, Sonia noted, marking the position with a small token. We'll draw the artillery there while moving squads through the south corridor. Graves looked at Karis. It's not brute force. It's orchestration. Chaos is a constant. We move through it. And sometimes we bend it to our will. Karis nodded slowly. She had been trained to see patterns, to predict outcomes through vast computational simulations. Yet here, in the analog world of mud, dust, and instinct, humans were producing results far beyond what any Taurian system could calculate. By evening, Karis had documented a full operational report. Her notes reflected not just the tactics, but the philosophy underlying them. Humans did not fight chaos. They moved with it, shaped it, and when necessary used it as a weapon. Every operation, every decision, every step was a testament to their adaptability, creativity, and unquantifiable intuition. The Taurian command observed the humans' actions with growing unease. Reports flowed in: artillery nests neutralized, patrols evaded, observation posts disabled. Coalition systems, previously reliant on digital guidance and networked coordination, were rendered irrelevant. And yet, the humans suffered minimal casualties. Graves addressed his team as they gathered around the sand table for the night. "Remember, we are not the strongest, the fastest, or the most technologically advanced. We are adaptable. We are unpredictable. And on Karis Prime, that makes us unstoppable." Karis, seated at the edge of the table, realized something profound. The humans had taken the battlefield, once a playground for technology and precision, and turned it into a stage for instinct, perception, and imagination. The machines could not compete. Algorithms could not anticipate. Only humans could succeed here in this ballet of chaos. And in that moment, she understood why High Command had sent them, not as mere soldiers, but as instruments capable of wielding the wild, unquantifiable force that was human intuition. The gray flood plain stretched endlessly beneath the harsh light of Karis Prime's pale sun. The metallic mud glimmered faintly, slick and treacherous under the weight of gravity heavier than any human soldier had trained for. From the forward observation posts, the Carcinite Ridge loomed, a series of jagged hills and eroded craters where the enemy had entrenched artillery, sensors, and patrols. 4 months, coalition forces had tried and failed to breach it using drones, guided shells, and network targeting computers. All had fallen to the chaos of the planet itself. Graves' human team approached the ridge at first light. Their movements were deliberate but unhurried, a product of instinct honed by years of operating under conditions far worse than the electromagnetic storms of Karis Prime. Each soldier carried only essential gear: kinetic rifles, minimal supplies, and a mind trained to observe, anticipate, and adapt. No guidance systems, no network targeting, no digital assistance. They were analog instruments, calibrated to the pulse of the world itself. Graves paused at a shallow depression in the mud, scanning the ridge through his binoculars. "We move through the low points," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "They expect us to hug the flats for cover. But the ridge, it's chaos itself. They're counting on that." Karis, recording every movement, noted, "Humans exploit enemy assumptions. Predictability is a weapon. Avoidance of predictability is the strategy." The first engagement came swiftly. A Carcinite patrol, expecting the same failed Taurian tactics, emerged from a crater, their sensors sweeping the mudflats in erratic arcs. Graves signaled, and the humans split into staggered arcs, their movement fluid and irregular, mirroring the uneven terrain. One soldier slipped forward to trigger a small, improvised distraction, a controlled collapse of a mud bluff, while the others advanced along hidden channels. The patrol reacted, but too late. Kinetic rounds struck with precision, not as a barrage, but as a series of calculated, surgical strikes. Carcinite responses were disjointed, the soldiers disoriented by timing they could not predict. Karis' log filled with notes. Humans leverage terrain, timing, and instinct simultaneously. Enemy algorithmic prediction is nullified. Further up the ridge, a hidden artillery nest prepared to open fire. Taurian systems would have calculated probable trajectories and fired preemptively, but here human intuition intervened. Sonia, using analog triangulation from listening posts, identified the artillery's location and range. Without digital assistance, she calculated the timing of the gun's reload cycles and plotted safe intervals for the humans' advance. Graves led the team along the ridge's shadowed flank. The mud clung to their boots, thick and metallic, slowing every step, but the soldiers adapted. They moved in sync with the beat of distant artillery, slipping between firings, sliding along eroded gullies, and using the natural contours as cover. The humans had learned the rhythm of chaos, and chaos itself became their shield. At the crest, they encountered the first of the main Carcinite fortifications. Artillery barrels pointed in every direction, sensors blinking intermittently under the electromagnetic interference. Instead of attempting a frontal assault, Graves signaled a split. One team would create a diversion at the southern approach, triggering false sensor readings and temporary disturbances in enemy fire, while the rest of the team advanced through a narrow, eroded ravine on the ridge's western side. Karras noted, diversionary tactics are human-crafted, simple, yet exploit the enemy's cognitive assumptions. No machines involved. Effect: maximum disruption, minimal exposure. The diversion team moved first, triggering controlled detonations of mudslides, collapsing weak terrain, and tossing small reflective materials to create false targets. The Carcinite gunners shifted focus immediately, trying to recalibrate their positions. The humans in the ravine moved silently, climbing jagged rock faces, crawling through mud-slick gullies, avoiding detection by relying solely on observation, sound, and intuition. As they reached the heart of the ridge, the humans encountered a small squad of Carcinite engineers. Graves hesitated only briefly, then signaled a coordinated takedown. Kinetic rounds disabled weapons, and human movement prevented an alarm from being raised. Within moments, the squad was neutralized without alerting the larger force. The humans moved onward, exploiting confusion and the enemy's over-reliance on automated detection. By midday, the humans had reached a series of artillery positions deep in the ridge. The operation, which conventional Taurian forces would have deemed suicidal, unfolded with precision. Each team acted independently yet in concert, guided by observation and instinct rather than algorithms. Charges were set on critical systems, sensors jammed through simple analog disruption techniques, and artillery was neutralized or captured. Karras' log was overflowing. Outcome defies predictive modeling. Human improvisation, timing, and physical adaptability outperform superior technology. Enemy response inconsistent, reactionary, and largely ineffective. Even as the humans advanced, the Carcinites attempted a countermeasure: concentrated fire from previously dormant positions. Sensors and targeting algorithms tried to track the humans, but the irregular movement, unpredictable timing, and use of natural cover rendered machine calculations useless. Kinetic rounds flew wild, failing to find their mark, while the humans continued their methodical advance. At the ridge's summit, Graves finally paused, scanning the battlefield. The Carcinites, once confident in their fortified positions, now scattered in disarray. Taurian command, watching through failing feeds, could only see chaos. Advanced weapons and systems that had failed before were now rendered irrelevant by human timing, intuition, and improvisation. Graves turned to his team. "We've taken the ridge. Not with power, not with numbers, but by moving with the world instead of against it. Remember this: chaos is not an obstacle. It's the battlefield itself. Learn to walk with it and you are unstoppable." Karras, witnessing the operation firsthand, finally understood what High Command had meant. Humans were not just soldiers. They were a force of nature, capable of thriving where technology failed. They operated beyond predictive models, beyond algorithms, beyond assumptions. Here, on Karras Prime, they were the ultimate weapon. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the ridge in muted gray and rust tones, the humans consolidated their position. Small fires burned along the ridge as they worked silently to secure captured artillery and neutralize remaining threats. Karras recorded every detail, every movement, every decision, every success. For the first time, she saw a battlefield transformed not by firepower, drones, or precision targeting, but by humans themselves. Instinct, improvisation, observation, and courage had triumphed where centuries of technology had failed. And she knew, deep within her analytical mind, that the galaxy would never face such a force again, and might never understand it fully. The ridge fell silent under the gray haze of Karras Prime's second morning light. The humans had consolidated positions overnight, securing captured artillery and fortifications. Carcinite forces, disoriented by the audacity and precision of the previous day's operation, began to respond, but their movements were tentative, fractured, and erratic. Graves surveyed the ridge from a shallow hollow. His binoculars swept across the floodplain below, noting faint shapes of withdrawing units, small pockets of resistance, and isolated artillery crews. "They're hesitant," he said quietly to Sonia. "They don't understand what hit them. We've introduced uncertainty, real uncertainty, and that's more dangerous than firepower." Karras, standing behind him, wrote furiously in her notebook, "Humans exploit enemy psychology. Not brute force but cognitive disruption as a tactical weapon." In the makeshift human command post, Graves convened a brief meeting. Maps and listening post reports lined the table, alongside small tokens representing enemy positions. He tapped a series of symbols with a pencil. "Notice this," he said. 2 batteries here, 3 patrols here. If we act predictably, we fail. If we act in rhythm with their expectations, we're neutralized. But if we introduce randomness, timing, direction, and deception, we amplify their fear, slow their response, and force errors. Sonia adjusted her compass and slide rule. We've calculated intervals between artillery cycles, average patrol sweeps, and sensor recalibration periods. By varying our own movements, we can exploit those patterns. They'll shoot at ghosts while we take ground. The team nodded, understanding instinctively. To them, the mathematics of unpredictability were as natural as breathing. To Karis, it was a revelation. Humans did not just act within chaos. They shaped it, danced with it, weaponized it. The first operation began at mid-morning. A small human squad advanced toward a ridge crest, deliberately making noise at intervals that mimicked a larger force. Carsonite gunners fired preemptively, their rounds exploding harmlessly in mud or ricocheting off empty terrain. Simultaneously, another squad moved silently along a parallel channel, bypassing enemy lines entirely and planting charges to disable a hidden artillery nest. From her observation post, Karis could only record numbers and icons, yet the screen could not convey the essence of what she saw. Humans operating on a plane beyond algorithms, beyond prediction. Their movements were strategic yet fluid, precise yet improvisational. By midday, Carsonite units were in chaos. Patrols contradicted each other's movements, artillery fired without coordination, and communication lines jammed, not from interference but from confusion. Human unpredictability had induced systemic failure in an enemy trained to anticipate regularity. Graves' team then escalated psychological tactics. They deployed small, controlled explosions at irregular intervals across multiple sectors. Each detonation was carefully measured to maximize disorientation. The Carsonites reacted not to the humans' numbers but to the apparent logic behind their actions. A logic they could not comprehend. Each misfire, each sudden movement, each disappearance and reappearance of a human squad deepened the enemy's uncertainty. Karis noted, humans utilize minimal technology to create maximal psychological impact. Effects are measurable in enemy hesitation, miscoordination, and attrition rates. Probability-based models fail to predict responses. Even the Taurian command, observing through failing feeds, struggled to comprehend the scale of disruption. General Soren leaned over a console, his plating scarred and dulled from decades of service, and growled. Their methods are madness. Yet they succeed. How? Karis, standing beside him, replied cautiously, It's instinct, sir. They read the battlefield, not the sensors. They anticipate behavior, not predict it. The chaos that defeats our machines empowers them. Meanwhile, humans advanced in unpredictable patterns, leveraging terrain and timing to isolate enemy units. A squad moved along the northern gullies, drawing fire and attention, while another struck at the heart of a lightly defended battery. Carsonite commanders, trained to counter predictable strikes and digital tactics, were powerless against movements they could not model. By late afternoon, Graves coordinated a larger maneuver. Several squads converged from multiple directions on a ridge cluster previously thought impregnable. Each movement was calculated to exploit enemy cognitive limitations, misdirection, surprise, and timing. The Carsonites reacted, but only reactively, leaving themselves vulnerable to the humans' coordinated yet fluid assault. The ridge fell in a crescendo of kinetic fire, improvisational tactics, and rapid adaptation. Human soldiers, though few in number and low-tech by any standard, had rendered advanced fortifications ineffective. Each captured position became a staging point for further operations, a ripple that would unsettle enemy calculations for weeks. Karis' notes grew increasingly philosophical. Humans are not tools, they are wild cards. Their methods cannot be quantified because they operate outside quantification. Probability is insufficient. Intuition is weaponized. Chaos is not an obstacle, it is an ally. That evening, the humans returned to their forward post, physically exhausted but unbowed. They tended to equipment, marked new enemy positions, and shared observations using simple notation and discussion. Their movements were calm, deliberate, and efficient, a contrast to the devastation they had wrought. Graves, looking out over the gray floodplain, said quietly, We didn't just take the ridge. We've introduced doubt into their system. They'll question every sensor, every movement, every calculation. And that doubt will slow them even when we're not here. Sonia leaned over the sand table, adjusting the placement of tokens. It's like we're playing a game of music, she said softly. They're trying to predict the rhythm but we keep changing the tempo. Every measure is a surprise. Karis finally understood. Humans did not merely fight, they choreographed chaos. Their advantage was not weapons, numbers, or technology, it was the unpredictable combination of instinct, perception, and imagination. Where machines failed, humans thrived. Where algorithms stalled, human intuition flowed. Where logic faltered, creativity struck. For the Taurian command, the implications were terrifying. Humans could not be controlled, modeled, or anticipated. They were a force of nature, a variable the galaxy had not accounted for, and the more the coalition tried to integrate or restrict them, the clearer it became. Humans were a factor beyond politics, beyond technology, beyond even the highest calculation. Graves looked at Karis, a faint smile on his pale face. "You'll see this again," he said. "Every time. When things seem hopeless, when the numbers and the tech fail, humans will adapt, improvise, and turn the tide. We don't just fight. We survive. And sometimes we win." Karis wrote her final note for the day. Observation. Human adaptability introduces a qualitative advantage that defies quantitative analysis. The human factor is a variable unaccounted for in coalition planning. This species, though small, low-tech, and underestimated, represents a force capable of reshaping entire battlefields through instinctual mastery of chaos. As night fell over Karis Prime, the ridge, once a bastion of the Carcinites, was in human hands. Silence reigned, punctuated only by distant artillery echoes, the metallic mud settling after the day's upheaval. And somewhere deep in that silence, the humans rested, knowing the galaxy had just glimpsed the scope of a force it could neither fully predict nor contain. The gray floodplain had begun to settle. The ridge, once a chaotic bastion of Carcinite fortifications, was quiet. The humans moved methodically among the wreckage, checking equipment, ensuring captured artillery was secure, and marking positions for coalition forces to occupy. It was not a victory in the traditional sense, it was a reclamation of logic from chaos, an assertion of intuition over technology, and it left the Taurian command awestruck. From the observation post, Karis recorded every movement, every adjustment, every calculation, or lack thereof. Humans do not merely adapt, they exploit patterns the universe cannot quantify. Where algorithms fail, they succeed. Where predictive models break, intuition flourishes. They are simultaneously unpredictable and methodical. Graves' team had suffered few casualties, an outcome unthinkable to Taurian officers who had lost entire battalions in similar operations using the latest drones and guided munitions. The difference lay in approach. Humans were not constrained by protocol or systems. They observed, improvised, and acted with a clarity born of experience rather than computation. The coalition high command began to take notice. Reports of human-led operations flowed in. The Carcinites' artillery had been systematically neutralized, patrols scattered, and morale shattered. Observers sent from other sectors could not comprehend the speed and efficiency of operations. Patterns that had confounded their sensors for weeks fell apart under human initiative. Yet, as the humans consolidated the ridge, news arrived from the coalition's political offices, a formal recognition of human service, but with severe limitations. A decree, later known as the Karis Prime Accords, outlined in precise, bureaucratic language that humans were to be celebrated, lauded, and studied, but explicitly prohibited from participating in future frontline engagements alongside coalition forces. Sonia read the document aloud, her voice tight with disbelief. "They're benching us. After everything we just did." Murmurs spread through the human contingent. Confusion, anger, and incredulity mingled in the small, dusty command post. The words of the accord were clear. Humans were too valuable, too disruptive, too unpredictable. Their skill in navigating chaos was a weapon the coalition feared to trust. Graves, silent until now, leaned back against a mud-streaked bunker wall, eyes on the horizon. A faint smile touched his lips, not of amusement but of understanding. "It's a cage disguised as a shield," he said quietly. "They honor us because they fear us. They celebrate our victories because they know we're uncontrollable. And now, they keep us out of the fight because if we act freely, nothing, no algorithm, no protocol, no rule, can contain us." Karis, scribbling notes furiously, tried to reconcile her observations with this political reality. The human's advantage lies not in hardware but in cognition. They are instruments of chaos mastered. Coalition bureaucracy recognizes the threat of unbound intuition. Meanwhile, the Carcinites were regrouping, but the psychological and operational shock inflicted by the humans could not be easily undone. Units that had once coordinated flawlessly with pre-digital discipline now hesitated, overreacted, or fled in confusion. Every miscalculation was amplified, every hesitation exploited. Humans had imposed a form of cognitive warfare beyond the understanding of conventional military doctrine. In the quiet aftermath, the humans gathered in their small mess hall aboard the dented transport freighter. Their movements were relaxed, almost casual, belying the gravity of their achievements. The gray floodplain's devastation was visible through the viewport. Mudflats littered with wrecked Taurian armor, scorched positions and shattered Carsonite bunkers. Graves looked around the room at his team, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and quiet pride. "We've won," he said simply. "Not because of machines, not because of numbers, but because we adapted when others could not. Because we saw patterns in chaos that algorithms can't touch. And because we survived when the predictable would have failed." One of the younger soldiers shook her head, incredulous. "And yet, they're keeping us out of the next fight. After everything?" Graves' smile remained faint but steady. "They don't want another Karis Prime. We're too effective. Too human. People build temples to gods to contain them, to lock the door and pray the god never comes out. That's what these accords are. They honor us but they fear the consequences if we're unleashed again. That's all." Sonia, finally processing his words, sat back heavily. "So we're being celebrated as heroes, but also imprisoned by their recognition." "Yes," Graves said, turning to look out at the floodplain again. "We're a force they respect but cannot control. And that is exactly who we are." Karis, for the first time, understood. Humans were not tools, not soldiers in the conventional sense, they were a wild card, a force of nature. Technology, strategy, and planning could only go so far. Beyond that limit, humans thrived. They were a species that lived for adaptation, that made decisions under uncertainty with creativity and courage no algorithm could replicate. High Command sent formal congratulations to the team, documenting every human success as evidence of coalition adaptability and resilience. The Karis Prime Accords were praised across the galaxy as a humanitarian measure, ostensibly designed to protect a vulnerable species. Yet to those who had seen the battlefield firsthand, the truth was evident. Humans were too dangerous, too effective, too unpredictable to be trusted as mere instruments of war. And so, the humans remained, honored but restrained, recognized but sidelined. The galaxy had glimpsed the potential of a species capable of reshaping warfare itself through instinct, intuition, and courage, but it would not allow them to do so again. Not fully. In the quiet of the mess hall, the human soldiers shared stories of the battlefield, of improvisation, of split-second decisions that had turned the tide. Their laughter was subdued but genuine. They had walked through chaos, stared into its heart and emerged victorious. Yet they had also seen how the galaxy's institutions feared the very qualities that had allowed them to survive. Graves' final words of the day were simple, almost a whisper, but heavy with understanding. "We've won, yes. But the victory belongs to no one but ourselves. Out here in chaos we were free. That's something no accord, no award, no bureaucracy can ever take away." As the stars of Karis Prime flickered in the pale night sky, the humans rested. The ridge was quiet. The floodplain settled. And somewhere, deep in the galaxy's political heart, the coalition planners realized they had unleashed a force they could neither fully predict nor contain. Humans had shown what it meant to thrive where technology failed, and the galaxy would remember whether it wanted to or not. The transport freighter moved steadily through the void, leaving Karis Prime behind in the pale wake of dawn. Inside the small mess hall, the human contingent sat quietly, their uniforms dusty, their rifles cleaned and stored, their gear carefully packed. Outside, stars scattered across the blackness, indifferent witnesses to a war that had been won through instinct, improvisation, and a mastery of chaos no algorithm could match. Graves leaned back against the wall, fingers laced over a worn notebook. The others were scattered around the room, some studying maps, others idly sketching diagrams, and a few simply resting. There was no fanfare here, no medals pinned to chests, no speeches to mark the triumph. The galaxy's bureaucrats had seen to that. The Karis Prime humanitarian accords were clear. Humans were heroes on paper but restricted in action. They were celebrated for their skill, yet barred from participating in future engagements that would exploit the very edge that had won the war. Sonia, running a pencil along the edge of a map, finally broke the silence. "So, we saved their asses and now they're benching us. After everything. Isn't this insulting?" Her voice carried more frustration than anger, but it was clear she struggled with the contradiction. Graves didn't reply immediately. He looked at the viewport, eyes distant. "It's not an insult," he said finally. "It's fear. They honor us because they've seen what we can do, and they want to preserve themselves from it. They celebrate us because they have to, they're afraid of what happens if we're allowed to act freely again. Karis, documenting the discussion meticulously, scribbled a note. Human instinct and improvisation have imposed a strategic and psychological advantage so profound that coalition politics cannot reconcile it. The humans are simultaneously a solution and a threat. One of the younger soldiers, tapping her webbing strap nervously, asked, "But, aren't we just being punished for being good at our job?" Graves allowed a faint smile. "No. Punishment implies wrongdoing. We didn't do wrong. We acted freely, and in doing so we reminded them that control is an illusion. We exposed the limits of their systems, their algorithms, their assumptions about the universe. And that terrifies them." The mess-hall fell silent again. The hum of the transport's engines was the only sound. Outside, Karis Prime receded, a scarred, chaotic world that had tested humans beyond the capabilities of technology or protocol. The gray flood plain, the shattered ridge, the echoing artillery barrages, they had been mastered in ways no machine could replicate. A subtle tension lingered among the soldiers, not of fear but of anticipation. They had seen the edge of what humans could accomplish, and it was intoxicating. In the silence, Graves spoke again. "People build temples to gods to contain them. They lock the doors and pray the gods never come out. That's what the coalition's done with us. The Accords are a cage disguised as a shield. They protect us from future exploitation, but they also protect themselves from the impossible." Sonia shook her head slowly. "And the galaxy calls this honor?" Graves tilted his head, pale eyes catching the faint light from the viewport. "They do. And they'll repeat it in every record, every dispatch, every history book. But they'll never be able to use it. They've glimpsed what humans can do, and now they're afraid to let it happen again. That's the truth." Karis, finishing her notes, reflected on the human presence. Observation: humans operate beyond the predictive limits of coalition planning. Their cognitive and instinctual mastery of chaos enables victories unattainable through technology alone. The galaxy honors them yet restrains them, acknowledging a force too wild to control. In the weeks that followed, the transport ship carried them home through uncharted warp corridors, avoiding hostile territories. In the small confines of the mess-hall, the humans shared stories of improvisation, close calls and split-second decisions. Laughter broke occasionally, ringing sharp against the background hum of engines. They were soldiers but also explorers of uncertainty, performers in a theater of chaos where instinct and experience dictated outcome. As the fleet approached human-controlled space, the news feeds aboard the transport broadcast the formal recognition of the Karis Prime Humanitarian Accords. The coalition praised the contingent in elaborate terms: bravery, resilience, ingenuity, and courage beyond measure. Yet every accolade carried a subtle qualifier, a reminder that the humans were to remain observers rather than participants in future conflicts. The galaxy revered them as heroes, but feared them as forces beyond comprehension. Graves stood at the viewport, watching stars blur into warp streaks. "They'll study us," he said quietly to no one in particular. "They'll measure every action, every outcome, and still they won't understand. They'll respect us on paper but they'll never risk letting us fight again. And that is exactly what freedom looks like." Sonia approached, placing a hand lightly on the worn console. "Freedom? We're being sidelined. Betch. Kept out of the war. How is that freedom?" Graves' gaze didn't leave the stars. "Because out there," he said, gesturing toward Karis Prime in the fading displays, "we were unconstrained. We faced impossible odds, mastered chaos, and survived. No accord, no medal, no political decree can take that from us. They can honor us or contain us. They cannot undo what we've learned or what we've become." Around them, the other humans nodded silently. The stars stretched infinitely ahead, a reminder of possibilities beyond the limits imposed by any authority. They had walked through chaos and emerged not broken, but sharper, more attuned to the rhythms of unpredictability that no algorithm could match. Graves finally turned, a faint, weary smile crossing his pale face. "Remember this," he said, voice low but carrying weight, "the galaxy doesn't get humans. They don't understand intuition, adaptation, or instinct. And that's fine. We don't need them to. We survived where technology failed, where rules faltered, where probability broke down. And we'll do it again. Every time. Because that's who we are." The freighter slipped into the vast, cold expanse of human space. Behind them, Karis Prime and the Coalition's chaotic battlegrounds faded into memory, a proving ground for instinct and ingenuity. Ahead lay stars and the unknown, unbound by regulations or predictions. The humans rested not as soldiers controlled by protocol, but as masters of chaos, keepers of intuition, and inheritors of a freedom that no political accord could cage. And somewhere in that vast, indifferent galaxy the coalition planners would remember what had been unleashed, but they would never again fully trust it. The human factor had been proven. The galaxy had glimpsed the edge. And humans would always walk it, untamed.